everybody, this is Cody Jackson for Cody. Finally catching up to doing another video. You'll probably hear dogs in the background and some other noises. I'm not in my normal recording studio as that is filled with Christmas presents, so I am recording at my other desk, which is right next to the window where my dogs and the neighbors' dogs all happen to congregate. I'm not going to be talking about what I said in the last video, which is Python and SQL, because honestly not a lot of people directly interact with SQL using the DB API anymore, and so I'm just going to jump ahead and talk about how to use SQLAlchemy to use Python programs to do the heavy lifting of the SQL queries for you. And without further ado, I'm just going to jump in, talk about it. So SQLAlchemy, you need to import into your environment. In this case, we are importing SQLAlchemy itself in terms of column, integer, string, and create engine. And then we're also importing the declarative base. So the declarative base is what actually uses a mapping of Python terms to SQL. And so it acts as a translator between our class, which is what actually defines what a table would be within a database, and converts all of that Python code to the equivalent SQL commands that would do the work for you normally. So we have base as an instance of declarative base, and then that is used as an inherited class for our class tools, which is going to create the table tools. And then we have a bunch of variables here that define what our columns are going to be, and then the rows are going to be the actual data that we put into them. We use the create engine to specify that we are using SQLite as our database for this particular project, and then we tell it what the path is, and this is just going to be the basic path to our directory that we're in right now. Obviously, as a path, you can tell it wherever you want it to go. And having done all of that, we call the create all method from base, which takes the engine, basically creates the database within our file system, and populates the table with all of the columns that we have. So to get started with that, we will go ahead and run this, and exit code 0 means it was successful. And if you want, you can verify in your file system and see that SQLAlchemy example.db, which is the name that we gave it, has been created in our current directory. Going over to the database population, we import the engine again, import our session maker from SQLAlchemy, and then import tools and base from our declarative file. Again, create an engine. This time it's connecting to the existing database rather than creating a database, and so we bind that link to our base so that it has the ability to actually interact with the database. Our session maker uses the engine to establish a session for reading and writing and whatnot for this particular session. And this is important because down at the end you have to commit all of your changes to the database using a explicit commit command. If you don't do that, all of the changes you've done are just sitting there in memory, but they are not actually in the database. So once we've created our session, we go through, and tools is our table, and so we are populating individual rows with information. And it's just like a regular Python command where you are creating an instance of tools, name, box knife, size, price, and assigning that to a variable. So same stuff that we've done before in terms of object-oriented programming. There's nothing here that is specific to SQL. You just need to know that SQLAlchemy is doing the work and what parameters SQLAlchemy is looking for. But generally speaking, it's everything that we've done before in regards to objects. Once we've created all of these variable assignments, then we take them all together, wrap them up in a tuple called items, and then we add all of the items, which is the tuple, to the session, and then commit that session to the database. So let's go ahead and run this. So now we've populated the database. Now to confirm that we have information in the database, we're going to create another session and take a look at what's in there. In this case, we're copying in the same stuff that we had over when we were populating the database. So reading from the database is basically the same thing. We have our engine, we're binding the engine, create a session, and so down here we are starting to do the actual queries. So this first one, we just want to see everything that's in the database. So we query tools, the table, and we want all items that are in the table. And then so we have a for loop, so for tool in tools, print tool name. Now granted, this could have been a list comprehension, but I put it here as this because it's actually a little bit easier to read when you're first getting used to this. Next, we are going to do a query and just get the first entry in the database and put that on a new line, print the name. And next we are going to use a filter, which is like the select command in SQL, and we are looking specifically for items that have a price column where the value in that column is 10, and we want one item back with that given price, and put that on a new line. And then finally we are going to run a filter where the price is 25, but we want all of the items with that same price. So if we go ahead and we run this program, then you see first we get every item that is in the database, and you can confirm that with what you've put over here when we wrote to the database. Next, we get the first item that is within the database, and so that matches up. We see screwdriver is the one item that was returned with a price of 10, and we see that the putty knife and the hammer are the two items, or all, with a price of 25. And so that's basically it. This is SQLAlchemy really makes working with databases and SQL queries very easy, because everything you're doing is a normal Python command. And so once you understand what data SQLAlchemy is looking for, especially in the preparation part, which would basically be your imports, creating the engine, creating the session, and things like that, everything else you're doing is just pure Python. And so this is why I just chose to go ahead and skip working with a DB API and working with SQL commands directly, because at this point in the development cycle for Python, you really don't need to do that anymore unless there's a real reason to, and unless you're working in an enterprise environment and you have database administrators and stuff like that who may require you to do that for whatever reason, SQLAlchemy is going to handle all of that drudge work for you so that you can spend your time in Python getting stuff done rather than having to deal with SQL queries and trying to figure out how to do different selects to get the information you want, joining tables together and things like that. Now, we did not talk about joining tables in this. That's a little bit more advanced than I wanted to talk about. This is really just a exposure to SQLAlchemy and what it can do for you. But recognize that anything you can do in SQL normally, you can do with SQLAlchemy. Just take a look at the documentation. There's books out there that talk in more detail about it. So, that's it for all I want to say. This is going to be a short video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, let us know in the comments. Otherwise, have fun, continue programming, and hope you have a good holidays, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks. Bye.